Everyone, an absolute delight and very excited on this episode of Words, Images, and Worlds to be talking with author and publisher Richard Chizmar. Well, Richard, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for jumping in and joining.
Thanks for inviting me.
My pleasure. Absolutely. I, of course, know your work through Cemetery Dance Publications. You have created work in the world of Wendy with someone who I won't name names or anything, but his name rhymes with Meme and Ming. So that person, and also you have Memorials that's on the way, which I've just had the pleasure to read and
Oh, good.
really enjoyed and was thrilled by. So
Thank you.
welcome to the show. And by means of a first question, I'm always curious about what connects people with storytelling, and in your case, the genre of horror.
You know what? I'm the youngest of five. So I grew up in a big family and a big family of readers. So I was surrounded by books. From a really early age. Trips to the library were a regular, occurrence and viewed as a good thing. Which my friends never
Mhm.
really understood. But yeah, that's where the initial just kind of being surrounded by stories and words came from. And then as far as and I read everything, and I had three older sisters, so I was reading like Sidney Sheldon and books, books like that, well before the any age that I should have even been, allowed to pick up and open those books. uh,
Mhm, mhm.
but just pretty much anything I could get my hands on, whether it was, Reader's Digest for my mom, or my dad was big into crime and spy novels, so a lot of old pulp paperbacks. I remember very vividly going to the paperback swap shelf with him in the local library. Um, so yeah, like I said, I read everything I could get my hands on, and and then I think reading some comic books is where I kind of started steering into the mysterious and the unknown and the scary. But I was always attracted to those kind of movies too. As far as Wizard of Oz back in that day, in those days, it was a big yearly showing on television. It wasn't like you could pop it in the VCR or the CD player or even pick it up on cable. It came on like once a year, like the Christmas specials. But like
Mhm.
Wizard of Oz, everyone else loves certain things, certain parts of that movie. For me, it was always the scary flying monkeys and the haunted forest, and I was terrified. I had nightmares, but I couldn't wait to watch it the next time. Same thing with like kids movies like Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, the child napper with the big net. Man, he haunted my dreams for years. But again, I couldn't wait to watch it again and see that ugly guy. So yeah, there was like a natural, there was a very natural affinity, for that kind of material. And then as I got older, I discovered, Alfred Hitchcock and the big thick books of his that had, collections of stories from other authors, and the Twilight Zone and that kind of thing. Um, and then that eventually led me to King, and he led me to a bunch of the others. So yeah, that's where it was. I feel like I kind of just grew up in their warm embrace, and had no choice but to end up where I did.
A journey well told, absolutely, and a warm embrace, but also one that's sometimes ghastly,
Oh yeah.
creepy, and yeah. So I mentioned memorials a bit ago. I'm curious about what inspired this particular book.
I had the idea for memorials. I mean, at least 20 years ago. And I always thought I would write it as a film, as a script, because it's a very visual idea, and it's also a very traditional idea as far as in like 1980s 90s horror film, where you have this group of young college students who are put together in this group, and they go off on this road trip to do this project for their class, and they're kind of thrust into something that they hadn't planned on. um,
Mhm.
and I've always been fascinated by those roadside memorials, in a kind of a somber way. I've always at some point I started noticing them. So then, initially the wheels start turning, and I'm like, where did they, when did they start springing up? Where did they come from? Because I don't remember, back in the early 80s seeing them when I started driving, but at some point they became a fairly, it became a fairly regular occurrence to drive past one. So then naturally, your writer's brain starts thinking about the stories behind each one. And that's kind of where memorials came from, the idea that there's this group of students who are kind of bonded together by loss in their lives, separate tragedies that they've each experienced. And they want to do this project on memorials, kind of behind the scenes, the stories behind each one as they can uncover them, um, as a way of kind of remembering the people who were lost. And they start noticing some really disturbing similarities that occur at a number of these roadside memorials. And then, just about the time that they're starting to put two and two together, they've drawn the wrong attention, and bad things start to happen. So yeah, I always saw it as a movie kind of inspired by like Race with the Devil on the, that kind of thing. Well before, there was a Blair Witch, a lot of these ideas that kind of people are going to say, hey, you stole that from Blair Witch. It doesn't matter.
Right.
I steal plenty of stuff. I would just absolutely gloriously steal it and admit it. But just so yeah, a lot of different ideas that kind of just got thrown in there, and it's really a big campfire story. I know I said the same thing about the Boogeyman books various times, but that description really fits this one. Road trip, bunch of young people, bad things in the woods and on the roads. So yeah, it's a campfire story. I hope people enjoy it.
Yeah, yeah. It struck me as somebody that's lived in Appalachia all my life in one corner of the area or another. And so what was it like to kind of explore that wilderness and even the kind of Appalachian scene in that way?
I live in Maryland, so I don't live too far
Hmm.
from parts of the region, and we've certainly did some exploring of our own. But I'm also good friends with a few people who were raised there. And just that, I did an interview the other day with Publishers Weekly, and they asked a really great question about that, and it kind of made me go into my brain a little bit and figure out what attracted me so much beyond just it's the kind of locale that at times is really creepy. The idea that you have such a vast area of at times wilderness that some people claim still hasn't been really touched much. The fact that there are factually that new villages have been discovered that don't even have a name, and obviously they're small. It's a cluster of numerous families, but that's in this day and age, in this overcrowded country of ours, that's pretty intriguing. In a lot of ways it's appealing, and in a lot of ways it's a little intimidating and threatening. um so beyond just the geographical configurations of the land, which lend itself to some spooky stuff. There's such a deep tradition there. There's such, I mean, they talk about how some of the mountains there have, they go back to the beginning of time, and it seems like the perfect place to kind of have given birth to gods, both good and evil. And then beyond that, the really rich storytelling tradition that the Appalachians have, and that really is kind of the answer I pulled out of myself for Publishers Weekly. Is I realized, yeah, there's that kind of attraction to a group of people who hand those stories down from generation to generation, and there's so
Hmm.
much so that the lines begin to blur between what's really fact and what's fiction and what's legend. And again, so all that kind of goes in the book in hopefully subtle ways, and comes across, and again it feeds into it being a campfire story.
Yeah. Well, the next question is sort of in honor of some of the lineage that we've talked about, some of those people that have had you in their embrace, and looking at the wall of books behind you. I'm curious about what it's been like to be part of this lineage and to work with people through cemetery dance.
Yeah, I mean, it's been I guess I can't think of any more entertaining or intelligent way of saying, for me it's been a dream come true. I discovered all these people at a pretty early age, and then I started cemetery dance when I was pretty much 21 years old and in college. And I can remember living in the apartment I lived in. My roommate did the artwork for the first couple issues. I remember, playing basketball all afternoon, and then, my alarm going off on my watch and me having to run back to the apartment to take a call with R.C. Matheson, or
Mhm.
it's just the whole range, Robert McCammon and various people. And I didn't go to conventions, for like that first decade because I didn't want anyone to know I was just a big dumb kid. Um, so yeah, I mean, being able to, reading these people, watching the Twilight Zones and becoming familiar with George Clayton Johnson and William Nolan and Richard Matheson and of course Ray Bradbury was one of the few that were actually taught to us in school. And then before I know it, working with these people and corresponding with them and by letter, there were no emails in those days,
Right.
um, and speaking with them on the telephone, and then having the absolute honor of publishing them. Yeah, it was and remains, ridiculous in many ways, but I'm blessed and I just count my blessings that I've been able to do this because I don't know what else I would have done if not this.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're out there doing the things you're doing and glad that Memorials is hitting soon. Any particular place that readers can go to find out what's next, to follow along and to find out about your work?
There's richardchizmar.com, the website, which I need the folks who run it for me are awesome, but I need to get them more, updates.
Mm.
I've been so busy with promotional stuff, and my son and I are writing a book right now called
Nice.
Widow's Point, which is an expansion of the original novella Widow's Point. We're writing the full-length novel version for Simon and Schuster. And that's due in a few weeks. So yeah, I've kind of had my head buried in the sand lately. But I need to get out there, update it. But I'm on social media too. I that's kind of my, what I have to offer back to the publishers besides, hopefully writing decent books is, I do feel I've been on the publisher side of the desk for so long that now that I'm on the other side as a writer, I really feel indebted to them for trusting and believing in my work. So I kind of try to go that extra mile when it comes to promoting, and so that leads to Twitter and Instagram and Facebook, and I've been really fortunate. 99.999% of the folks I interact with are awesome.
Yeah.
I hear nightmare stories all the time from writers, and they're like, "Oh my God, I've got hundreds of people blocked," and I'm like, "I can count the people I've blocked on like two hands." I mean, that may have gone up,
Nice.
the last
Nice.
couple of years,
Yeah.
um, but not much. So I've been fortunate.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, glad that the community has been good and good to you, and glad to celebrate your work. Anything that we've missed that you want to make sure to share before we close out?
No, all good. Just thank you to the folks who have taken a chance on me as a writer. I've been writing the whole time. I started as a writer in the early 20s before I was a publisher. But the publishing quickly kind of took over. And even though I sold dozens and dozens of stories over the years, it wasn't until I was, in my early 50s that I finally, sat down and wrote my first novel. So the idea that I kind of have this second life as a writer has been really a neat gift for me, and I'm just totally wallowing in all the goodness. So thank you to the readers who are putting down their hard-earned bucks to read me, and I appreciate it, and I'll do my best to keep turning out decent books.
I'm sure. I'm sure. As you mentioned, you're steeped in this tradition and so many voices. And Richard, thank you for the time. I'm glad to have you back anytime to talk about projects as they come along.
Thank you, I appreciate it anytime.